Grace Whitmore touched the microphone and smiled. And finally she said, "We have someone who reminds us that not everyone needs to succeed to deserve an invitation." Laughter moved through the room. Daniel Cole stood in the center in a gray work shirt with paint on the left sleeve. He did not lower his head. He looked straight at Grace, the one person he had trusted enough to come back for, and she did not recognize what was in his eyes. Behind the stage, the screen flickered. Meridian Dynamics. Chief Executive Officer, Daniel Cole. The room went quiet. The afternoon before had been ordinary. Daniel came home at 4:15 with plaster dust on his boots and a thermos that had gone cold an hour before he remembered to drink it. Lily was at the kitchen table with her homework spread out around her, pencil moving in slow circles that meant she was thinking about something other than what was on the page. She looked up when the screen door opened. "You remembered tonight, right?" He set the thermos in the sink. "I remembered the reunion thing." "Yes." She studied him the way she did when she was preparing for a negotiation. "Are you going to change?" He looked down at his shirt, paint on the left sleeve, a small tear near the second button he had been meaning to fix for a month. "No," he said. She chewed on her pencil. "People are going to say things. People are going to think what they already think, Lily. That has been true for a while." He ran water over his hands. "It is not why I am going." She understood that the way she understood most things he said, not immediately, but in the way that settled in over time. She was 10 years old and had been reading him for 3 years without anyone to help her do it. He was pulling his jacket off the hook in the hallway when his phone rang. "Ray Ortiz." He answered it. "You are actually going," Ray said. "I am going." Silence on the line. Then, "Marcus has something planned for tonight. He has had Grace running the whole program, the introductions, the bit at the end." A pause. "She agreed to it, Daniel. All of it." "Did she agree to it?" Daniel said. "Or did she agree to the version Marcus showed her?" Ray was quiet. Daniel waited. "I do not know," Ray said finally. "That is something. It does not help you tonight." "No." Daniel looked at the hook at the end of the coat rack. 3 jackets belonging to him and Lily. 1 jacket behind the others that had not been moved in 3 years. He did not look at it directly. "I am not going because of tonight." "You know why I am going." Ray did know. The industrial complex on Roanoke's South End. 840 people and a Tuesday deadline and a term sheet that had been assembled without the knowledge of anyone who would be affected by it. Daniel had been maneuvering for 6 weeks. The reunion was incidental, except that the right people would be in the room, and Daniel had learned long ago that being in the right room at the right moment was worth considerably more than the discomfort of getting there. "I will be there at 7, Daniel said, and ended the call. He went back to the kitchen. Lily had turned in her chair. "Everything okay?" "Yes." He kissed the top of her head. "Lock up at 9. Do not wait up." "I always wait up." "I know." "Do not." She smiled at the table rather than at him, which was her way of agreeing to something she was not actually going to do. He drove into the city with the windows down and the radio off, watching Roanoke pass on either side old mill buildings converted to apartments, the diner on Jefferson that had been there since before he was born, and the long stretch of Route 11 where the factory buildings stood in rows like something that had refused to adjust to the present tense. He had grown up here and left at 18, and come back 3 years ago with a 10-year-old and 2 suitcases, and a company he ran from a laptop, and he had told no one anything. That had not been difficult. People rarely asked what you did when they thought they already knew. The Civic Center had been decorated to approximate the gymnasium none of them had ever really liked. Blue and white streamers, foam boards with photographs taken when everyone was 17, a banner over the doors that read "Class Reunion," with the letters slightly crooked, and no one apparently inclined to fix it. Daniel stood inside the entrance for a moment, reading the room. Grace Whitmore was at the far end near the low stage, speaking to 2 women he half recognized from old photographs. She held herself with the composed authority of someone who ran meetings for a living, weight back, chin level, hands available but not busy. He had read her official biography 3 times in the past month, for reasons that had nothing to do with the reunion. Director of Economic Development for the city of Roanoke. It was a precise fit for the person she had always appeared to be becoming. She glanced up when he walked in. A beat of recognition. A polite nod, clean and brief, the kind that acknowledged without committing to anything. Her expression offered nothing it needed to manage, Then she returned to her conversation. He found a spot near the back wall and stood with a glass of water. The evening moved through its paces. Introductions. A slideshow that someone had assembled with more effort than skill. A song from the wrong decade played at the wrong tempo. Grace managed all of it with an ease that confirmed what he already suspected. She was genuinely skilled at this. Reading the energy in a room, knowing when to let it breathe and when to move it along. She had been that way at 18 too, which was part of why Marcus had wanted her at the front of the room tonight. When she reached his name in the roster, she did it cleanly. And Daniel Cole, who has been keeping Roanoke's pipes and baseboards in excellent condition for quite a few years now. A brief glance at her notes, theatrical in its precision. "We appreciate you, Daniel." Laughter moved through the room. Applause with a grin built into it, the kind that carried a small current underneath. His phone buzzed. He pulled it out. Meridian board call in 10 minutes. Austin team waiting. CEO approval needed on Sheffield contract. He felt Grace's attention shift. Not obviously just a small peripheral movement, a fraction of her awareness relocating toward him. She was standing close enough to catch the screen. He turned it face down against his palm before she could read past the first line. She moved on to the next name, but something in her voice had changed by one small degree. A pause where there had been no pause. A breath taken a syllable too early, then recovered. She finished the introduction. She moved to the next name on the list. In a room full of people who were laughing, Grace Whitmore looked down at her notes and did not laugh with them. She had read the line. The line had landed exactly where Marcus had designed it to land. The room had given him what he wanted. She had given him what he wanted. For the first time all evening, she was not quite where he had placed her. She could feel the distance between those two things, and it was smaller than it should have been, and she did not know yet what to do with that. After the formal program ended, and the room opened into conversation, Grace worked the crowd the way people in her position learn to a few words here. A check-in there, the practiced ease of someone who moved through public rooms professionally. Daniel watched her from near the bar, finished the last of his water, and crossed toward her. She saw him coming. He could tell by the small recalibration in her posture, the chin lifting a fraction of an inch. "Daniel." She extended her hand. He shook it. "You are good at this. You always were." She blinked, as though she had prepared for something different. "At what?" "Running a room." A short pause. She offered the standard. "It is good to see you. Are you doing well?" "I am fine." He looked past her briefly, then back. "How is the Whitmore Mill complex doing? The renovation project on the south end, the one that was supposed to wrap in October." Something shifted in her posture. Not dramatically, just enough to notice if you were looking for it. "How do you know about that?" she asked. The timeline slipped, he said, as though she had asked about something else entirely. "Permitting issues. The city pushed the contractor, but the real bottleneck is the adjacent lot on the eastern boundary. It is under a separate development hold, which means the renovation cannot proceed past that wall until the land dispute resolves." He looked at her. 312 workers are affected by the delay. Roughly a third of them are on 60-day contracts that do not roll over automatically. Grace was very still. The noise of the room continued around them as if neither of them were standing inside it. "Where are you getting those numbers?" she asked. Her voice was even, but the evenness was deliberate. Daniel smiled. A small, unhurried smile that said nothing about the answer. A hand appeared at her elbow. Ray Ortiz, jacket not quite fitting right through the shoulders, leaning in with the expression of a man completing an errand. "Grace, Marcus needs you in the back for a minute." She looked at Ray, then back at Daniel, as if calculating how much of what she was thinking showed on her face. "We are not done." "No," Daniel said. "We are not." She went with Ray. Daniel picked up a fresh glass from the bar and stood quietly while a man named Gerald Pratt began a story about a fishing trip in the Outer Banks that had apparently involved considerable misfortune and one borrowed boat. Gerald did not ask Daniel what he did for a living. The two men standing nearby did not either. Nobody in the room asked. They thought they already knew, and knowing relieved them of the work of finding out. It was not a new experience. It was, in fact, an experience Daniel had been navigating for 3 years with a degree of deliberateness that most people would have found difficult to maintain. The work clothes helped. The truck helped. The general posture of a man content with small things helped most of all, because people found it easy to believe and did not look past it. What people rarely considered, in Daniel's experience, was that the man content with small things and the man running a $140 million company from a laptop were not in conflict with each other. They were the same person. The work clothes were not a disguise. He genuinely fixed things with his hands. He genuinely lived in the house on Maple Street and drove the truck and picked Lily up from school on Wednesdays. The rest of it was also true. People found it easier to accept one version of a person, so he let them. Ray returned 20 minutes later and positioned himself just to Daniel's left. She took the notes from him, Ray said, barely moving his lips. He only showed her the first sections when he briefed her earlier. She does not know what the fourth section says. Gerald was demonstrating something with both hands. I know, Daniel said. Ray waited. There was not more. 2 words, and Ray had known him long enough to understand that was the whole of it. The back hallway off the main room smelled of carpet that had absorbed 20 years of events just like this one. Marcus Riley was near a folding table with his jacket unbuttoned and his phone on the table face down. He looked like a man who had recently ended a call he would prefer had not been witnessed. He smiled when Grace came in. You are doing great out there. Exactly what we discussed. Grace stood in the doorway without crossing it. He knew about the Whitmore Mill timeline, the specific permit dates, the reason for the contractor delay. Marcus lifted one shoulder. He is around town a lot. People talk. He knew the number of workers on 60-day contracts. Not approximately. He said 312. Grace. Marcus picked up his phone and turned it over in his hand. The small gesture of a man who had done this kind of conversation before. There is one more piece for the end of the evening. I have the closing notes ready, just a few lines. The room is exactly where it needs to be. He held out a folded piece of paper. Here. She took it. She did not open it. Reunion spirit, he said. You know how these things go. Nothing we have not done before. She looked at the paper. She thought about 312. The specificity of knowing something to that exact a number. The distance between knowing something approximately and knowing it precisely was the distance between someone who had heard about something and someone who had a reason to track it closely enough to count. Fine, she said. The word came out flat without her meaning it to. Marcus studied her for half a second, something behind his eyes recalculating, making a small adjustment. Then he smiled. Last thing of the evening. After this we are done. He touched her elbow briefly, the practiced warmth of a man who had learned exactly how much contact people accepted from him. You have been great tonight. I mean it. She walked back out into the main room. The party had loosened in the past hour. Music had appeared from somewhere, something soft and forgettable from the mid-2000s, and small clusters of people had arranged themselves around it. She moved through them automatically, saying the right things, laughing at the right moments, the professional ease of it so ingrained that she could do it while thinking about something else entirely. Daniel was near the far corner, where Gerald Pratt had moved on from the fishing story to a story about his truck. Daniel was listening with the patience of someone who had decided, before arriving, what kind of night this was going to be and how he was going to exist inside it. Not performing indifference, simply having it, the way you had something you had been carrying long enough that it no longer felt like weight. Grace watched him from across the room for a moment. The stillness of him. The way he occupied the space without requiring it to be different from what it was. It was not the stillness of someone enduring something. It was the stillness of someone who had already arrived at the place he intended to be. She looked away. Ray found Daniel briefly, while Gerald's story was reaching its conclusion. She took the notes, Ray said, not moving his lips much. She has not opened them. Daniel looked at Gerald, who was demonstrating something with his hands. She will read them, and when she does, and then she will make a choice, Daniel said. People always do. That part is not mine. Near 10 o'clock, Marcus caught Grace's eye from across the room and tilted his head toward the stage. She excused herself from the conversation she was in and walked to the front. The microphone was where she had left it. She tapped it once and the room settled. All right, everyone. Conversations wound down. One last piece before we let you all get home. She unfolded the paper. She had read it in the hallway after Marcus left all 4 sections, straight through without stopping. The first 3 sections operated on the right side of sharp, the kind of thing reunion programs occasionally did, the kind of joke that produced a laugh and a small private wince from whoever it targeted, and then the room moved on, and everyone forgot about it by the time they reached the parking lot. The fourth section was not on the right side of anything. She began reading. The first line landed the way Marcus had predicted. She had watched him predict it, the slight forward lean when he described the bit to her, the certainty in his voice that came from having run this particular calculation before. He had been right about rooms for as long as she had known him. That was one of the things she had always found reassuring about him, and she was only now beginning to understand what reassurance had cost her. The second line got a louder response. She kept her voice even, her pacing steady, the practiced ease of someone who had been running events since before she was old enough to be paid for it. She reached the third line. Laughter, broader now, the room fully with her the way Marcus had known it would be. Across the room, Daniel stood with his arms at his sides, and his face composed in the way of someone who had decided, before tonight began, what he would and would not react to. He was not watching her. He was looking at a point somewhere past her left shoulder, present in the room without requiring anything from it, with the particular stillness of a man who had spent considerable time learning to be still. She looked at the fourth line, his daughter's name, a punchline constructed around the absence of a mother, framed as a joke about failed ambitions and poor choices. The mechanism of the joke required a child's grief to function. Without that grief, there was nothing there. She stopped. The room took 2 full seconds to realize she had stopped. Someone coughed. Marcus, from near the side wall, looked at her. His chin moved almost imperceptibly. Continue. She looked at Daniel. He was not watching her. He was simply in the room, present in the quiet way of someone who had already made peace with every version of how this evening might end. Whatever she did from here, he had not needed it to go any particular way. She folded the paper. Actually, she said into the microphone, let us skip that last section. She set the paper on the edge of the stage. She announced last call for the bar, and the room moved on in the way that rooms move on when the silence is filled quickly enough that no one has to decide what to do with it. Marcus walked out through the side exit without looking at anyone. His face was a closed door. Ray stood near the bar and watched the exit door swing shut behind him. Something that had been building for 3 weeks settled quietly into place. The side hallway had wall sconces that gave off a yellow light and made everything look like a photograph from a decade that had not quite happened. Grace had come out for air and found that air was not the thing she needed. Ray came around the corner and stopped when he saw her. She looked at him. Tell me, she said. He had been preparing this. She could see it in the way he stood up slightly, the way a man straightens before delivering something he has been carrying. Marcus has been in negotiations for 4 months. Private equity group called Vantage Capital, incorporated out of Delaware. They are acquiring the entire South End industrial complex, all of it, every parcel. The deal closes next Tuesday. She waited. Their operating plan calls for all manufacturing facilities to close within 6 months of acquisition. The real estate gets repositioned for mixed-use retail and residential development. He stopped. 840 jobs. Most of those families have been at those plants for 20 years or more, some of them longer. The hallway offered nothing. No sound came through the fire door at the end. The yellow light continued its work without improvement. I found the documents in his office 3 weeks ago, Ray said. I was not supposed to be where I was when I found them, but I was there and I saw them, and I have been trying to figure out what to do about it since then. He exhaled slowly. There is one more thing. There is a competing bid on the complex. A company that wants to acquire it and keep the operation running, expand it actually. They have been working through a holding structure, but the parent company name was on the term sheet I saw. She was watching him without moving. Meridian Dynamics, he said. The CEO name on the acquisition filing is Daniel Cole. The hallway did not change. The sconces gave off their yellow light. The fire door stayed closed. Grace stood with that information and allowed it to do what it was going to do. She thought about a man who knew that 312 people were on 60-day contracts, not approximately 300. 312. She thought about a man who had walked into this room in paint-stained work clothes and absorbed everything the evening had sent his way without shifting his weight or his expression, who had asked her about the Whitmore Mill timeline with the precision of someone who had been paying close attention for a reason. She thought about the fourth line on the paper still folded in her coat pocket. She had read 3 lines before she stopped. 3, not 1. She was not going to stop being aware of that. The fire door at the end of the hallway did not open. The ceiling did not rearrange itself into something more comfortable. She was still the person who had been standing at that microphone, and the hallway did not offer her a version of herself that made that easier to inhabit. She did not run back into the main room to find him. She stood in the hallway alone for another minute, with what had just broken open, and then she pushed off the wall and went back through the door. Marcus was at the bar refilling his drink when she crossed the room toward him. He watched her coming and assembled his expression into something practiced and warm. "Good instinct on the skip," he said. The room was where it needed to be regardless. "When does the deal close?" she said. The warmth left his face, not gradually, as though it had simply been turned off. "I do not know what Ray told you." "Tuesday. He told me Tuesday. Is that the correct date?" These negotiations involve a level of complexity that the city does not have complete visibility into. There are factors that 840 people work in those facilities. He set his glass down. When he looked at her now, the overlay she had been reading for 15 years was gone, and what was underneath had always been there. She was simply seeing it without the other thing on top. "You are an economic development director. You understand how these processes work. The complex has been operating at a loss for 3 consecutive years. Private capital creates new activity, new tax base. Their plan closes the factories. You are going to trust a man who repairs people's baseboards over someone who has spent 15 years building something in this city?" She did not answer that. She walked to the stage and picked up the microphone. "Can I have everyone's attention, please?" The conversation stopped. There was a real estate transaction being finalized this week, involving the South End Industrial Complex. I would like to know whether the council members present tonight have been briefed on the full terms of that transaction. 2 men near the back of the room sat up in their chairs. She knew their faces from City Hall meetings. Marcus was beside her in 3 steps. "This is not the time or the place for city business." "You are right," said a voice from the floor. Daniel was already walking toward the stage, not hurrying, simply moving toward it with the quality of someone who had decided what he was going to do before he stood up to do it. Marcus turned toward him. "You do not have standing here." "No," Daniel said. He stepped up onto the stage. "But my company does." He took out his phone. 2 taps. A video call connecting and then open. A conference room appeared on the screen. Long table, 8 people, the Austin skyline visible through floor-to-ceiling glass, 11 o'clock their time on a Thursday night. "I am going to ask the Meridian Board to confirm our acquisition position for anyone in this room who wants to hear it directly." He held the phone up so the screen faced the audience. Carl, a man at the head of the table, leaned forward into frame. "Meridian Dynamics has an active acquisition bid on the Roanoke South End Industrial Complex. Bid submitted 31 days ago. Terms include full workforce retention across all current facilities, a $12 million capital investment in equipment and facility upgrades over a 36-month period, and a wage benchmark structure tied to production targets. We are prepared to proceed immediately upon resolution of the competing bid." The room was completely silent. Marcus stood on the stage with his drink still in his hand. His face had the quality of something set too firmly that was beginning to find the lines where it would crack. "The competing bid," Daniel said, "plans to close all manufacturing operations within 6 months of acquisition. My team has a copy of the Vantage Capital term sheet. The council members here will want to see it before Tuesday." The term sheet came from Austin within 3 minutes and appeared on the venue's projection screen through a cable that a young man from the catering staff produced without being asked, as though it were simply a thing that needed doing, and he had identified himself as the person to do it. Marcus tried twice. He said the document was a preliminary draft. He said it had been taken out of context. Ray stepped forward from near the wall just 1 step, unhurried, and said, without raising his voice, that he had seen the final version in Marcus's office 11 days ago. He named the folder. He named the date printed on the cover page. He described the tab it had been filed under. Patricia Holm, who had sat 3 rows behind Daniel in sophomore history class, and who had been a city council member for 4 years, asked Marcus directly whether the council had been provided the full terms of the Vantage Capital deal prior to tonight. Marcus said the matter was in a sensitive phase and that premature disclosure could compromise. Patricia Holmes said she would be on the phone with the city attorney at 8 o'clock in the morning. Gerald Pratt, who had earlier told a long story about a fishing trip and who was the other council member in the room, said he expected a written briefing on his desk by 9 a.m., and that this was not optional. Marcus looked around the room once. There was nothing in any direction that was going to be of use to him. He walked out through the side exit. The door swung shut. The room exhaled. Daniel stepped down from the stage. Grace was a few feet away. The space between them was different from what it had been at the beginning of the evening, charged in the way that air is charged just before pressure changes. Not electricity exactly, but the presence of something that had not been there before. She moved to stand beside him, not saying anything. He did not say anything either. Just the two of them standing in the same place. The room around them had broken into the urgent murmur of people working through something together. Where Grace and Daniel stood, the quiet was separate from all of that. She was aware of what she had done tonight and what he had been doing at the same time, and the distance between those two things was not a comfortable place to stand. She did not try to make it more comfortable. She did not look for the right thing to say. There were things she could say. None of them were adequate, and she was not in the habit of offering what was not adequate. He did not need her apology. Whatever he had come here to do, it had not required her apology as a precondition. He had walked in knowing what the evening would bring and had come anyway. Because 840 people were going home tomorrow without knowing what had been decided on their behalf, and he had been the one positioned to do something about it. That was the thing she was going to carry for a while. The weeks that followed moved at the institutional pace of things that involved documents and meetings and people in offices, making decisions that affected people who were not in offices. There were public statements from the city. There were responses from Meridian that confirmed what had been confirmed on a projection screen in the Civic Center. There was a quiet Tuesday morning when Marcus Riley submitted his written resignation from the city council and was, by the end of that week, no longer a presence in Roanoke. He left without ceremony, which was appropriate. Ray Ortiz received a phone call from an Austin area code on a Wednesday afternoon. The voice was Daniel's, and it was brief in the way that Daniel was brief. A position was available at the Roanoke facility plant operations manager. Starting date in 30 days. The terms were stated clearly. Ray said yes before the terms were finished being stated. The acquisition closed on a Thursday, 19 days after the Civic Center. The Roanoke Times ran it on the front page beneath a photograph of the main factory gate, a worker walking through it, slightly blurred by motion. The word lifeline appeared in the headline. That was accurate, if not complete. Grace came to the factory complex on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks later, with a cooperative framework agreement, a formal arrangement between the city's economic development office and the new ownership structure. The paperwork determined that she should be there. She was honest with herself about that. Daniel's temporary office was at the end of the main building, in what had been the plant manager's suite. He had done almost nothing with it. A desk, a laptop, a coffee maker that was newer than everything else in the room, which was the only thing that suggested someone had made choices about the space. Outside the window, the factory floor was running, and the sound of it came through the glass as something solid. She knocked on the open door. He looked up from the desk. Framework agreement, she said, and held up the folder. Sit down, he said. She sat. They went through it section by section. He asked 2 questions, both precise and both relevant. She answered them. When the final signature was in place, she stacked the copies and returned them to the folder and set it on the corner of his desk. Neither of them stood up. The Sheffield equipment in the East Wing, she said. That was ordered before the acquisition closed. The timeline required it. You were planning this before the reunion. Weeks before. He did not deny it. The bid was already in. The reunion was a pause, something that was happening at the same time. She looked at the folder on the desk. I read what Marcus had written. All 4 sections. I read 3 lines before I stopped. I want you to know I am aware of what that number is. He said nothing. She had not asked him to. The plant tours start next week, he said. If the city wants a representative from economic development, there is a slot on Wednesday afternoon. She looked up. I can send someone from my office. You could come yourself, he said. A plain sentence. Nothing in it except what it said. Wednesday, she said. He nodded. She picked up the folder and walked to the door. She stopped at the frame with one hand on it. She did not turn around. Thank you, she said, for what you did. For the people here. The pause behind her. Brief and not uncomfortable. They were worth doing it for, he said. She left. The factory floor outside went on without either of them, the way real things do. It was a Thursday afternoon in late October when Grace was cutting through Elmwood Park on her way back from a site visit on the South End. She was looking at her phone when she heard her name. Not quite her name. Miss Grace, which was a construction she had heard once before and which belonged to one specific person. She looked up. Lily Cole was on the grass 20 feet away, waving with the complete confidence of someone who had already decided they were friends. Daniel was on a nearby bench with a coffee cup and a book open in his lap that he did not appear to be reading. "Hey," Grace said and walked over. "We are just here," he said by way of full explanation. "Dad said we could get dinner after. I picked the place." "Good choice," Grace said, not knowing which one. "The Thai place on Campbell Avenue. They have noodles Dad pretends not to have a preference about." Daniel looked at his coffee cup. Grace sat down on the bench. Lily settled cross-legged beside her father, with the ease of a child who did not find benches awkward. The park moved around them, a dog at the limit of its leash. Two older men at a stone chess table not speaking, the fountain near the south entrance doing its slow and steady work. "My mom used to bring me here," Lily said, to no one in particular. She was watching the dog. "We had a spot near that big oak. She would read and I would just walk around and find things." A pause. "Dad comes here sometimes. Not when I am with him. I know because he tells me he went for a drive, but he smells like fountain water when he gets home." Daniel looked at the fountain. Grace said nothing. "I think it is okay," Lily said. "I think Mom would have thought so too. She used to say he needed places where he could just stop, because he does not stop very much on his own." She picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. She was right about that part. The fountain went on. Grace did not know what to say. She had been learning recently that in certain moments, not knowing was the appropriate place to be, and that sitting inside it without trying to fill it was something she could do. "I am glad you came today," Lily said, plainly and without ceremony. "Dad does not add people very much. He had more people around him before, I think, when things were different. Now it is mostly just us." A brief consideration. "And Ray, but Ray talks too much about baseball." Daniel smiled at his coffee cup. The light was changing. October moved the light out earlier than expected, without much warning. The park was still and gold and faintly cold. Eventually Lily spotted something near the oak tree and went to investigate it, moving across the grass with the purposeful urgency that children brought to things that interested them. Grace and Daniel were alone on the bench. The space between them was not large. Neither of them addressed it in either direction. They sat in the quiet and watched the park do what it did. After a while Grace stood. "I should get back." Daniel stood. He did not have a reason to. He stood anyway. Lily came running back and hugged Grace briefly, and with full commitment, the way children hug when they have already made up their minds about someone. "Bye, Miss Grace. You should come to the Thai place sometime. They have other things besides the noodles." "I will keep that in mind," Grace said. They walked to the park gate together. Lily a few steps ahead. At the sidewalk she would turn south and they would turn north. And there was a pause at the gate, brief and without ceremony, asking for nothing. "Goodbye," she said. "Goodbye," Daniel said. She started walking. Half a block south she turned back the way you do when you want to confirm something was real. Daniel was still at the gate. He raised one hand. Not a wave exactly. Just an acknowledgement that she had turned, and he had seen it. She faced forward and kept walking, and the park fell away behind her, and Roanoke went on being exactly what it had always been. Neither of them had been looking.